Hello and welcome to this Safe Sanctuary training opportunity through First Presbyterian Church. We thank you for tuning in. We thank you also for being a volunteer with our ministries to young people and for the work that you do and for the important role that you play in the life of our young people. Let's get right down to it. What is Safe Sanctuaries? Safe Sanctuaries is a series of guidelines, policies, and procedures initiated and implemented in order to create and maintain a safe environment for children, youth, and the volunteers who work with them. So, Safe Sanctuaries, in one form, is a piece of paper. It's a document that outlines our procedures and protocols for keeping kids safe and for recognizing signs of abuse and for reporting suspicions of abuse. But it's more than that. It's also something that, it's not just a piece of paper, but something that we diligently follow, that we take very seriously. Um, we say we are a safe sanctuaries church, and certainly that means something to people, especially if coming maybe for the first time as a visitor or from out of town. Because we are a safe sanctuary church, there is certainly an expectation that children are safe in our care. So sanctuaries is nothing new for First Presbyterian Church. We have considered ourselves a safe sanctuaries church since the mid-90s, kind of at the forefront of churches realizing the importance of having policies and procedures in place. But it was in 2008 that our policy and procedures underwent a significant revision. It was at that point that our procedures became more strict, more intentional, and more clear. And nearly each year since 2008, the policy has changed. So it's been a living document since its creation. Always we're noticing things that perhaps are difficult to interpret with the language we already have in place in the policy. So new language is created to address specific situations that need greater clarification or to address national trends in safe sanctuaries. So, why safe sanctuaries? Certainly, if you've been part of First Presbyterian Church for any length of time, you're well aware of safe sanctuaries. And so we say our calling and our mandate is to ensure safe sanctuary for all God's people. One of the ways we do that is to reduce the risk of abuse occurring here in this church at First Presbyterian. We want this to be a safe place for all people. It's also a refuge place for those who have already been abused, maybe in another sphere, a place where they can receive love and help. And thirdly, as volunteers work hard to keep up with the policies and procedures we have outlined here, workers are protected from false accusations and suspicions. So, how do we ensure safe sanctuary for all God's people? And that's really the focus of our training today. And it's twofold. So, the first part of our training will be about recognizing the warning signs for abuse and knowing how to report it wherever it may be occurring, whether it's something that happens in our church building or in our church ministries, or whether it's happening maybe at home. Secondly, we'll be looking at the specific procedures and policies that we have and how we can know, follow, and uphold them. Certainly, children and youth develop a network of love and trust within this church. So it makes sense that our church might be the place where they bring a concern of an abusive situation, where they feel that they have trusted adults that they can count on to help them through whatever situation that they might be facing. So volunteers and staff working closely with youth and children may be some of the first to notice some of these warning signs, or they might be the first to be told by the child or by the youth that something is wrong. In just a moment, we're about to watch a video created for the Department of Social Services in Virginia about abuse and for people who work with children or youth to be able to recognize warning signs of abuse and maybe how to process those with a child who's willing to talk. So there are some things that are unique to the school setting that are different than our ministry setting, and we'll talk about those after the video is over. But I hope this will be informative for you, and also eye-opening as we think about the children in our community that are dealing with very difficult things. Now, you may notice that this video is a little bit old. It was created in the year 2000, but the statistics that it highlights are still very accurate in our present day and time.
Your job has so many functions. To provide care, to enlighten with knowledge and understanding, to ensure good health. Every day there are signs, some obvious, some hidden, that a child in your care is being physically or sexually abused or neglected. When you learn to recognize the signs of child abuse and neglect and respond appropriately, you will become an integral part of a community determined to strengthen families by preventing abuse and neglect of children in Virginia.
It's important that we recognize the family in all of this, that we want the family to continue, and mandatory reporting is not an effort to always break up families. It's an effort to recognize problems within families and to recognize the need to move on. So we need teachers to be part of that full circle. They're involved with the child part of the day, and then other care providers are involved the rest of the day, and then they usually go home to their parents. So we have to have a full circle of individuals around that child, and everyone in that circle has to be able to recognize abuse and neglect signs.
Your help is required by law. A look around the Commonwealth shows the value of your compliance with the law. The Virginia Department of Social Services reports that across the state, nearly 9,000 children were found to be the victims of at least one form of abuse or neglect in just 1 year. Not only does the abuse cross cultural and economic lines, it also occurs outside of the family, in institutions and places that many families trust to look out for the well-being of their children. The most predominant type of child abuse is neglect, followed by physical and sexual abuse. Some children were also the victims of emotional maltreatment and medical neglect. 31 children in Virginia died as a result of abuse or neglect by their parents or caretakers. As a professional who is responsible for providing care to children, you are required by Virginia law to immediately report suspicions of abuse and neglect to your local Department of Social Services or the Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline. This law covers professionals who work in a large variety of programs where children are provided with services and care.
Nancy, she knows how to help children when things like this happen.
Good morning. This is Kathy Price. I'm the school nurse at Smith Elementary in Fair Lake.
When you make a good faith effort at reporting suspected child abuse and neglect, you are immune from liability, and your name will be kept confidential. To effectively follow this law, it's important to have a clear understanding of the different types of child abuse and neglect that occur. Neglect can be the result of the family's current status. A major family crisis, job loss, or serious illness can oftentimes mean the depletion of adequate care. Or it can be a continuation of a cycle of neglect that has occurred for generations. Younger children are at greater risk of neglect due to their own inability to meet basic survival needs. Children of parents who are substance abusers are also at increased risk.
When a child is neglected, it damages their self-esteem, because basically what the message that is conveyed to that child is, you don't matter, you're not important. As a result, these children have difficulty with relationships and difficulty with attachment. They are also at risk of sexual abuse, because often these children are so hungry for attention from others that they are not able to say no to inappropriate requests.
Defining physical abuse is a matter of drawing the line between corporal punishment and the kind of punishment that causes injury. Physical abuse most often occurs when an adult is angry or frustrated and strikes a child, resulting in injury. It is not uncommon for people to confuse discipline with abuse.
The state doesn't want to interfere with a parent's rights to discipline their children. We all have that right. But in reference to a child having the right to be free from harm and injuries, that's where we have, it's a thin line, but we have to draw that line in reference to trying to offer children the same protection that we have as adults.
Perhaps the most disturbing form of child abuse is sexual abuse. too many children in Virginia are victims of acts of sexual abuse. These acts violate a child's most basic need for emotional and physical safety. It is as if they are prisoners in their own family, neighborhood, school, or church.
Children who have been sexually abused have been robbed of their childhood innocence, often by a trusted adult. Their loyalty, trust in the relationship with that adult has been manipulated for the adult's own personal gratification.
Other children are victims of emotional maltreatment, while still others are born after having been exposed to drugs or alcohol during pregnancy. Such treatment is identified in Virginia's child abuse and neglect laws. Because abuse and neglect can be passed from generation to generation, it is even more vital that you understand how to recognize the warning signs and begin the important task of preventing abuse and neglect from being passed down to new generations of children.
There's a thin line between poverty and neglect, and we have to keep that in mind when we're working with families, because poverty looks just like neglect. And that requires our caretakers, our teachers, our nurses to have some working knowledge of the family in regard to just where they are economically. And if you're able to make that distinction, then you're in a better position to know when a family is just dealing at the best level they can, and when there's truly an issue where a child is going without because of neglect.
The signs of neglect: consistent hunger, poor hygiene, lack of supervision, and unattended healthcare needs are a call to action on your part. When you speak with a child about your observations, or if a child tells you about the possibility of neglect in her family, these general guidelines will help ensure that the conversation is handled sensitively, thereby creating a sense of security for that child.
So, Brittany, can you tell me why you came to see me today?
Mrs. White told me to come see you because I can't see the blackboard.
Okay. You're looking at the crackers. Did you want the crackers? Are you hungry? Okay. You can have the crackers. Here you go. Did you have breakfast this morning? No. Well, it's almost lunchtime now. Did you bring lunch?
Sometimes my friends share their lunch with me.
They do. When was the last time you ate?
My sister cooked spaghetti last night.
Really? Okay. Where was your mom?
Asleep. I can cook too.
Really? What do you cook?
I can cook spaghetti and bologna.
Wow. All by yourself? You must be very proud of yourself. Do you dress yourself? Did you dress yourself this morning? You did? You are very responsible, Brittany. Tell me, did you take a bath this morning?
I don't know.
No? When was the last time you had a bath?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, who made sure that you got to school today?
I did.
Really? All by yourself again? Where was your mom?
She was asleep.
She was?
Between your observations and your conversation with the child, you should be able to determine if there is suspicion of neglect. A child's statements will often help to clarify your suspicions.
Do you have a regular doctor who you see when you don't feel well? Okay. Brittany, I am really glad you came to see me today. And you know what we're going to do? We are finally going to do that eye exam, okay? So we're going to do that. And then why don't you and I go get some lunch?
These answers are indicative of a child who may be a victim of neglect. Physical abuse can be well hidden by fearful lies and hits to the areas of the body not revealed by clothing. But if you have a child in your care who reports pain or has injuries, there are ways to determine if the injury or pain is a result of accidental injury or physical abuse.
There's no doubt that children are very active, and after the age of 1 have great gross motor skills that can get them into a lot of trouble out on a playground or even in household play. And there are studies out in the literature that show that the average 3-year-old has 12 bruises on their body at any one given point of time. So how do we discern the difference between inflicted injury versus accidental injury? There are several elements of the injury that help you identify whether it was inflicted or accidental.
Inflicted injuries will be evident in scars that look far different than the accidental fall off a bike or scraped knee. Accidental injuries most often occur on the bony parts of the body: knees, elbows, shins, or forehead. Inflicted injuries affect the soft or hidden parts of a body, the back, thighs, buttocks, and the back of the legs. The greater the number of injuries, the greater the cause for concern. Unless a child is involved in a serious accident, that child is unlikely to sustain multiple injuries. Multiple injuries in different stages of healing may indicate abuse. Abusive injuries are often inflicted with familiar objects, such as a belt, stick, and paddle. The resulting marks often bear a strong resemblance to the instrument that was used. Accidental injuries resulting from bumps and falls usually have no defined shape. If an injury is accidental, there should be a reasonable explanation of how it happened that is consistent with the appearance of the injury. When the injury and the explanation are inconsistent, there is cause for concern. These photographs are of children who have had injuries inflicted by their parents or caretakers.
There is frequently an expectation from the caretaker that their developmental level is much higher than their age. So they expect them to get this activity done in a fashion similar to an adult, that it shouldn't be a task to be able to eat, and it shouldn't be a task to be able to get dressed. So when the caretaker loses patience with this aged child, the child is frequently grabbed around the upper part of the arm, around the forearm, frequently around the face. You'll find oval matching marks over either jawline from being forced to eat at a faster rate or forced to brush their teeth at a faster rate. When you look at this picture, there are more than a dozen bruises that have been incurred to this right lower extremity area. And these bruises are not all of the same age. They're in different stages of healing, and that can be determined by the fact that they're different in coloration. This location is not a bony prominence area on this child. It is mostly soft tissue. It would be unusual for this child to have a couple of bruises in this area, much less the greater than 12 bruises that we see. Loop marks are inflicted by a variety of instruments: Venetian blind cords, ropes, electrical cords, belts, so common household items that are used to hit the child. This picture shows us an example of classic switch marks. The location of these marks is across this child's buttocks. The child that we're seeing here actually was still diaper dependent, so the diaper needed to have been taken off for these marks to be inflicted. The explanation that was offered for these marks when this child was examined was actually that it was a diaper rash. A daycare worker is actually who identified the lesions and spoke to social services about it because of her concern that it was not consistent with the diaper rash. Ligature marks simply represent an area in which a child was bound or tied and left somewhere for a protracted period of time. With that child being bound, it is most frequently by a rope. It can be by other forms of restraints like handcuffs. With the child moving against that restraint, usually what occurs is breakdown and rubbing of the skin so that the injury that is left is similar to a rope burn mark.
Behavior can also tell a significant story. A child who is being physically abused may be apprehensive when other children cry, recoil from fast movement by a parent, caretaker, or other adults, be reluctant or afraid to go home. The same conversational guidelines used when talking with a child about suspected neglect can also be used when talking with a child about suspected physical abuse.
With most people, you just want to first get to know the child. You just want to ask him some general questions about his name, where he lives, who he lives with. Does he have any sisters or brothers? Are they older? Are they younger? Who's his favorite teacher? You just kind of get them to feel comfortable with you. And then you use a little bit of yourself. You tell them who you are, that I've been asked to come out to talk with you, and you identified the teacher or the principal, someone that they really know, and that's my friend, and we just needed to talk to you about something. And then you begin to engage them into whatever the issues are.
This will help you learn more about feelings the child may be holding inside. Feelings that may be a sign of any type of abuse or neglect.
Is this where you bumped it? Wow, buddy. That looks awful sore. Is that hurting you? What happened?
I don't know.
You're not sure? How did that happen?
I don't know. Maybe when I fell down.
When did you fall down?
when I was at my house.
Buddy, that looks sore. Does it hurt?
Mm.
I don't think you did that bumping into the shelf, do you? How did it happen?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
I think I broke the rules or something.
You broke the rules. Has anybody else ever hit you like this? No. It must really hurt, huh? Have you told anybody else about this? No? Why haven't you told anybody? That looks like it's really sore.
Because my dad said if I told anybody, he would hit me even harder.
I think we should probably talk to Miss Nancy. She knows how to help children when things like this happen. Would that be okay? Okay.
The child may be fearful or apprehensive, so it's important not to press for details that they are unable or unwilling to give. Building trust and showing support may be the first step in helping ensure the safety of that child. Neglect and physical abuse show their signs in far more obvious ways than sexual abuse. So often, when a child is sexually abused, the emotional scars, like the secretive nature of the act, are hidden. Those scars, however, can last a lifetime. Your responsibility is to recognize the patterns of behavior that are manifest in a child who is being sexually abused. A child who is living a life of sexual abuse is living a life of fear. Sexual abuse can have disastrous effects on that child's development. Sexually abused children can acquire sexually transmitted diseases or become pregnant. Their academic success can be stilted from a lack of concentration. Many sexually abused kids wind up having a difficult time trusting others and suffer from shame and guilt, even believing the abuse was their fault. But you can have a positive effect on that child by recognizing the signs of sexual abuse.
It's vital because teachers, especially daycare providers, are with children all day long. They are the key folks who know if something is different as recognized in the child's behavior or academic performance. They are your first identifiers. So they're in a good position to report any of their suspicions to Child Protective Services. Finally, we can't act until someone calls us.
In some cases, a sexually abused child may have detailed knowledge of sexual behavior that is inappropriate for his or her age. A child may create sexually explicit drawings. The type of play a child has with either peers or toys may sometimes be sexual in nature. A child may no longer like or want to be with a particular person or go to a specific place. The child's academic performance may deteriorate. The child may have sudden, noticeable behavior changes, such as mood swings or withdrawal from social situations. A child may be excessively concerned about sexual identity or homosexuality. The child may be seeking escape from a situation in which they feel powerless and unsafe. These behaviors are indicators that a child may be sexually abused. Talking about this with a young boy or girl can be quite difficult. Many children will find it quite difficult to acknowledge the fact that they've been sexually abused.
Children who are sexually abused are often very ashamed of what has happened to them. They often feel that it's their fault that they've been victimized. Often what we'll find is perpetrators will manipulate them into believing that they caused the abuse. They will also threaten them subtly by saying things like, "Your mother won't love you anymore if you tell. Bad things will happen to you and your family if you tell." Again, what the adult is doing is they're manipulating the child into believing that the abuse was their fault and that they will be held accountable for what has happened to them, when in fact the abuse is never the child's fault. It's always the fault of the adult involved in the act.
The secrecy, shame, and guilt associated with sexual abuse make it difficult for a child to discuss his or her situation. Respect the need for privacy by talking in a location where there are no interruptions. Sit near the child and touch him or her only with permission. Be alert for indirect statements alluding to the abuse.
I just don't feel good.
You just don't feel good. Is anything happening at home? Is your mom and your dad okay?
Yes.
They're fine. How about your little brother?
He's fine most of the time. A babysitter's there.
The babysitter's here? Who's the babysitter?
Mr. Casey.
Mr. Casey? I don't know Mr. Casey. Who's Mr. Casey?
Friend of the family.
He's a friend of the family? Have you known him a long time?
Yes.
Okay. Does he come often?
Yes.
He does? You seem a little upset. Is there something you want to tell me?
Because he won't leave me alone.
He won't leave you alone? I don't understand. What do you mean he won't leave you alone?
He just keeps bothering me.
He bothers you? How?
He just won't leave me alone.
He won't leave you alone? How won't he leave you alone?
He just keeps touching me and he won't leave me alone.
The types of statements you just heard and the behaviors we described are consistent with children who have been sexually abused. They are cause for suspicion.
And her sister at 10 puts her to bed.
You play a critical role in ensuring the safety of a child whom you suspect may be a victim of abuse or neglect. When your observations and a child's statements have created a basis for suspicion in your mind, it is time for you to act. You have two reporting options. You can report to your local social services department during normal business hours, or you can call the toll-free Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline 24 hours a day. Keep in mind that you do not have to prove abuse or neglect, only suspect it. Reporting is not at your discretion. Remember, it is the law and your duty to immediately report your suspicions. Child Protective Services cannot act until you make a report. Failure to report is a Class 3 misdemeanor. Remember, you are not acting as an investigator. When you report your suspicions to Child Protective Services, you are fulfilling an important responsibility as part of a community of people who want to ensure that all children live healthy and safe lives. There are many things we can do as professionals or simply as adults who care to help the children we know and their families.
So often, we don't understand the signs. You know, if you've grown up in a home free from abuse and neglect, you don't recognize the signs of abuse and neglect. And training is very important, you know, whether it's absenteeism, whether it's bruises, whether it's other injuries that are unexplained. We need to be able to recognize abuse and neglect.
You may be the one person in that child's life who makes a difference. You can start by listening to them with your eyes, ears, and your heart.
So that is no doubt a heavy and unsettling video. And as I think especially about our youth who are watching this video and being trained to work with our younger children, I think about how you might view, some of what you saw. And I almost considered creating a separate training just for some of our youth. But I hope that even thinking about the ways that other people, maybe even your peers, might be in difficult situation, that it helps you think about how to be a good friend and how to be supportive of others who are going through difficulty, how to be a cheerleader for them to speak up and to get help, and for you to be a person who can help them connect to those who can help them. One thing I always like to highlight at every training that I lead are some do's and don'ts as we think about if ever we were in a situation where we're talking to a youth or a child about abuse that they're experiencing. And so those are listed there. The main one that I want to highlight, though, is to make sure to take accurate notes according to what the child said specifically as soon as possible. I just think that's very helpful advice that I have heard in the past and have always held on to. Quickly, as emotion and lots of things are mixed up in hearing about something like this, it can get a little murky and muddy about what was actually said and what you as the person hearing it inferred. And so making sure to write down quotes of what you heard keeps that clean and make sure that it's exactly what the child expressed to you. So making sure to take accurate notes as soon as possible. Get those down on pencil and paper, or recorded, or in your phone, or or typed into your phone. However you might do that. That's very important. The key don't that I want to highlight is not to ask leading questions. And I thought the actors in the video did such a nice job modeling this. They never said, did this specific thing happen? They let the youth or the child express themselves in their own language to be able to get to the truth of the situation. We certainly want to do that as well. Now, the video was speaking and kind of addressing teachers specifically. Teachers are legally required to report. They are known as mandatory reporters, or other professions that are mandatory reporters as well. You may be a mandatory reporter. In your volunteer role, you may not technically be a mandatory reporter, but certainly the spirit of this is that we all, whether or not we have a legal responsibility to report, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to report. So we will consider ourselves all mandatory reporters regardless. There's certainly not a whole lot of opportunity to be interactive with a recorded training session, but a question to think about, it surprised me. For a mandatory reporter, how long do you think a person has to report a suspicion of abuse from the moment they first suspect it? I'll give you a second to think about that. I was surprised to find out that it is 24 hours. That seems really fast to me, but certainly makes sense. This is not something we want to sit on or hold on to or spend a lot of time considering it, because it is very important to get that information to the people who can help. So 24 hours, and so that's the standard we want to hold ourselves to. That immediately we're reaching out to the designated reporters of our church to be able to express a concern over the possibility of abuse. So the major difference in the school setting versus our ministry setting is the process of reporting. And so in the school system, you can, certainly in our situation too, you can reach out directly to Child Protective Services and report abuse, and that's certainly always acceptable. At our church, we have a designated reporter model, which is kind of the ideal situation, we believe, in order to connect with others who can help you wrestle, with the idea of whether a child or youth are experiencing an abusive situation or not. And it really is very much a judgment call. You have to use your own best judgment to determine that, because if you do determine that you have a suspicion that abuse is occurring, you are compelled to report it. So the designated reporter model helps you sort all that out. And so feeling that collaboration can only help in determining how best to help a child or youth in an abusive situation, we want to collaborate. We want, you as the volunteer, if you have the slightest suspicion, maybe not even enough to, you feel like to call CPS, you can talk to someone about what you've heard or observed or wondered about, and be able to have a second opinion on whether things need to go further or not. So we believe that's a great asset that will be a help to you. So in just a moment, we'll talk about who those people are at our church that you could go to with a concern of abuse, who are the reporters that can walk down that road with you. And we want to talk a little bit more about the process for the way that's done. So how do I report? Any allegation of child abuse, whether arising at the church or elsewhere, shall be handled as follows. The allegation of child abuse shall be treated seriously and reported to the pastor or head of staff or any other member of the Child Protection Committee. All procedures which occur in the handling of the allegation shall be documented from its earliest stage, but not necessarily by you. And so certainly this designated reporter model gives you trained people to go to with concerns. The burden will not be on you to lead the process, but it'll be on them in conjunction with each other as a committee that specializes in this sort of thing. So certainly if you bring a concern, all or maybe a small part of that group will get together and to discuss kind of what you've shared, to determine if it's grounds for suspicion of abuse. And so certainly in the video, as we watched, we noticed a lot of different situations where people had to make judgment calls. And the great helpful advice of that video highlighted the difference between typical, bumps and bruises that kids and youth experience through being active, and things that really highlight the possibility of abuse. And so you can use your discretion. You can make sure that the story for what you observe lines up with what you observe, and that those two things seem to make logical sense. If not, then that's something you can talk to one of our Child Protection Committee members about. So you might wonder, who are these people on the Child Protection Committee, and how could I connect with them if ever that situation arose? That committee is made up of all pastors that we have employed at the church at that time, the children's ministry director, the minister of music, and the weekday school director, and the youth director. So there's 4 programmatic ministry positions that are over key areas that work with young people. It's also made up of whoever the current W&D moderator and vice moderator at that time, and 1 member at large who currently is Ed Bell. So this is the group that you report to. It's also the group that helps make our policy stronger as you ask good questions, or look for clarification that we can't necessarily find in the policy. This group gets together annually to make sure that our policy is the most helpful that it can be, the most effective that it can be for ensuring the safety of everyone here at First Pres. What gets reported? And sometimes we might observe things or hear things that seem probably insignificant, but use your best judgment and share rather than keeping it to yourself. And so certainly as you share, especially with a committee that specializes in this and might hear from other people as well, it enables us to recognize a pattern if there are things that alone are not grounds for suspecting abuse, but together would be. Also, as we said before, it's the team approach to determine if any action is indeed required. That completes the first phase of our training. The second phase is our procedures, the things specifically that we do to prevent abuse from occurring here in our ministries at First Presbyterian Church. So we call this reducing the risk. And so the first and primary way that we reduce the risk is that we screen our volunteers. We say that there are some certain things that you need to do and confirm and promise in order to be a volunteer with youth or children. Those screening requirements include attending a Safe Sanctuaries training before beginning service and every 3 years. Of course, this online training counts for that as well. It also requires that every person who's going to be a volunteer with youth or children fully complete and return a volunteer application and the final page of the policy before beginning service, and redoing that every 3 years. So this is a change as of February 2019. We now require that all volunteers have a background check completed. So in the past, we relied on our open doors policy and also our 2-leader policy. We didn't require background checks of all volunteers, only certain volunteers in certain roles. That has changed. We now require at the time that you are beginning service, or at the time you are due to be retrained if you've been trained previously, we are requiring that all volunteers complete a background check at that point. This does just apply to those who are 18 or older, so we're not requiring background checks of our youth volunteers, but all adults will need to have a background check. Requiring a background check is just one more way to screen our volunteers and to make sure that we have the best possible people working with our youth and children. Many churches have, gone the route of requiring background checks, and we wanted to do that as well. The cost of the background check is relatively inexpensive. The church is covering the full cost. Many of our church leaders have already had background checks completed on them for serving as a mentor or serving on a mission trip, maybe serving on an overnight retreat. So there's been a good number of people that have already completed it, and we said we wanted everyone who works with youth or children to be able to complete that as well. So a form will be provided to you to complete that. We do want to make sure that we're very careful with the personal information on those. It does require a social security number. So those can be submitted in person, ideally, or mailed. They can be emailed, but we want to make sure that the record in your inbox is deleted and the record in our inbox is deleted. Those are processed by our business manager, Jennifer White. She keeps the top page where you sign to give permission, but shreds the bottom page once those are keyed into the computer. We require that all volunteers are willing to self-report any allegations made against them, that they would share those with the church, especially with our senior pastor or head of staff, and that they would do that immediately. And so certainly, even if allegations are entirely unfounded, it's important for the church to know about those and for you to be willing to share those. Also, to be a volunteer, we require that people are actively connected to this church for 6 months. The screening of our volunteers is an essential part of reducing the risk as we look at our procedures. The other really important rule that we have is the 2-person rule. And so we don't say this is the 2-adult rule. We say 2 persons. We value the work of our young people as volunteers, and they count fully. So an adult and a youth can work together as leaders over an activity. This requirement, this 2-person rule, means that we must have 2 volunteers at all times. And so there might even be a situation where there's only 1 child present for the program, and even still, we have to have 2 volunteers. And so certainly as there's always 2, there's greater accountability. The 2 persons who count towards this rule are not just anybody with a heartbeat. They are people who have been trained, who have gone through this process, who have completed necessary paperwork. Those are the people that count towards being 2 of the required adults. If the group is divided, so imagine that you are at youth group or some sort of special activity for young people, and you start with a male leader and a female leader, and you're all in one big room with the youth group or whatever the group may be, and you decide that you're going to split boys and girls in different parts of the church, and that wouldn't work because then you would only have 1 leader with the boys and 1 leader with the girls. You have to have 2 leaders at all times if you're splitting up, out of line of sight from one another. We also require that you must be 5 years older than the group you are serving with, and we require that male and female adults are present for an overnight event if the group is mixed in gender. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if the Sunday school teachers are both female or both male, or regardless of who's there. It only matters about the gender of the leaders in overnight situations. So if you're like me, you were watching the video from earlier that was made for the Department of Social Services and realizing that these private conversations were happening with 1 youth and 1 adult, and that under most circumstances that would be a violation of this 2-leader rule that we have in our setting. We always want to have 2 leaders, especially if there's only 1 child. In that situation, there might be an opportunity if the child was not comfortable talking to 2 people and maybe the relationship was better with 1, that they would feel most comfortable. We don't want to stifle them, sharing about an abusive situation. You could encourage your partner to kind of stay nearby, but to give you a chance to talk privately with that child about something that they needed to speak with you about, and that would be fine. If the two-person requirement is not met, so always in our planning, we are keeping this rule. It's always at the forefront of our brain, but sometimes things happen. Our partner that we're paired up with doesn't make it, and we're not sure why. People get schedules mixed up. Whatever the case may be, if the two-person requirement is not met, there's something that you can do, and I'll call these the 3 C's. The first thing you do is ask someone to help you meet the requirement. So call for help. Whether that's the parent who's dropping off before they disappear to their next activity, to be able to catch them and say, can you wait with me? Can you be my partner until the other leader comes today? And so if that person's a Safe Sanctuaries person, they can be your partner for the whole rest of the period. If they're just a parent, just encourage them to wait until you get it sorted out, so that you're not starting an activity being the solo person and having kids beginning to be dropped off. So you don't want to be in that situation. So call for help. It might be leaning out in the hallway and saying, and finding, pointing somebody out and asking them to come over to assist you until your partner gets there. It might be catching the staff leader that's over the ministry to either be your assistant, or to help find someone who's Safe Sanctuary trained to partner up with you that day. Another option, the second option, the first, the easiest, is to call for someone to help. But if for some reason that's not possible, you can combine with another class or activity that's happening at the same time. So if you're in the 2s preschool class and your partner is not there and you just have one adult with a group of kids, you can escort all of them upstairs to join the 3s and 4s class, so that now you can meet that. Or a youth group, if there's middle school is understaffed, then join the high school. And even if that's not ideal for what you hope to accomplish, it does help meet this requirement, which is very important. The third C is to cancel. And so, if we don't have staff for that night, then the activity, can't happen. And so that's our last resort there. The only exceptions to our 2-liter rule is that when caravanning to an event, you can have one driver with a group of kids, so that you're not taking 2 drivers in every car and really, have to take way more vehicles than would really be necessary. So that's the time that it's permitted. All those vehicles are traveling together. As soon as you park, everyone gets out and is there and ready for the activity. Another exception is non-overnight mentoring with parental permission and a background check for the volunteer who is mentoring. So that's certainly a big part of our 8th grade confirmation commissioning year, where our 8th graders are intentionally paired with someone that they look up to talk about faith together. And so we want to provide an opportunity for that. And mentoring, in that situation is okay to be one-on-one. But those other things, the parental permission and background check, are required. The Child Protection Committee can approve other exceptions, but at this point, the only one is for childcare outside of Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings, we require that there's always 2. We don't require that for things like women's Bible study or maybe a special session meeting. That we pay a person to lead the childcare for that, and they are background checked, but they are allowed to be the sole person providing care for the activity. Another foundational rule of our Safe Sanctuaries policy, the procedures that we have in place, is that of open classrooms. And so this is meant figuratively and physically. Any youth or children's ministry activity is subject to unannounced visitors. And so that's the figurative part, where people can come in. Parents, if they need to accompany their child, they are welcome to do so. Nothing we do is meant to be secretive or hidden. That people can come in and can be welcomed to do so. The physical part of this open classrooms is that Every door of any permanent children's or youth ministry classroom has a window in the door. And if there was a situation where that wasn't true, the door should be left open. Our policies apply to all youth or children's ministry activities in the weekday school on or off church property. It also, not just our church ministries, but also applies to anyone who uses our facility. That's groups like the Scouts or Market Street who use the playground, even youth groups that stay in the summertime in 12 East Court just to use our place as a place to rest and sleep for the night between their travel. All those sign an acknowledgement of our policy and agree to uphold it. We need your help to keep our church safe. So we do ask that you report any volunteers or outside groups who you observe not adhering to this policy. So it's so important. Continually, I'm impressed with our congregation's commitment to follow this procedure. But certainly, if there was an individual who was not doing that, we would want to know, and so that we can confront that and get to better understand that. We also ask that you report news of a church volunteer or attendee facing allegations. And so certainly, if it's in the local newspaper or whatever, the thought may be that everyone knows about this, but maybe everyone doesn't. So, please share. We'd rather hear it 30 times than 0 times, so that we can make sure a person is not continuing to serve if they do have pending allegations against them. There is some new language in our policy about ministering to offenders. And so one aspect of that is that if a registered sex offender begins to connect at our church, we want to set up kind of a meeting with that individual to create a covenant where they'll always have a partner with them as they're involved in church ministries or on church property to help hold them accountable and to ensure the safety of everyone here. So certainly, if that's agreeable, we set those parameters. If it's not, then that person is asked not to return back to our church. We also have added some language about when our young people work in outreach type ministries, where there might be a higher likelihood of working with people who have previously been incarcerated. And so just making our volunteers aware of that and making sure that their supervision is absolutely at its best. If you have any questions about Safe Sanctuaries, please don't hesitate to contact any member of our Child Protection Committee for clarification about any issues you might be wondering about. Thanks so much for being part of this online training. In order to get credit for participating, we ask that you email Todd Bowman, todd@fpcwink.org, to say that you've watched this video in its entirety. There are 2 forms that you'll need to complete if you're not also required to fill out a background check. The main 2 forms are the volunteer application and the final page of our printed policy that is a consent to follow that policy and also to state that you have no criminal convictions in your history. Thanks so much for your commitment to working with young people and for your commitment to ensuring safety for all God's people. God bless.